Hello and welcome to today's video. So this time I've taken three lovely original vintage hardbacks. This is the first one we're looking at here, which is the classic Kingsley Amis's Lucky Jim. And this one was published in the UK back in 1953 by Glance. Now, this particular book, this Kingsley Amis, this was his first ever novel. So obviously Kingsley Amis went on to write about 50 books in total, most of them fiction, but there was a bit of non-fiction as well. And absolutely, this is sort of a key book in British 20th century literature. Often regarded as one of the top 100 books of fiction ever published in the UK, at least. I've always liked Kingsley Amis. I really love his method of writing. It's very easy to read, great prose, and they're just good, fun stories. There's nothing too heavy. It's all a little bit of fun. I do particularly like Lucky Jim, and The Green Man are probably my two favourites of his. But he, of course, he was the very first person to take on the role of writing James Bond after Ian Fleming died, and he wrote, of course, Colonel's Son under the pseudonym Robert Markham. But Lucky Jim, I've got a big collection of Amos first editions. I've got about 40, but I never owned the very first edition. So I was delighted to find this undust wrappered copy of Lucky Jim on ABE Books, of all places, and I got it for £25, including the postage. It was £17 and £8 postage, which was ridiculous for that much postage, but I did think it was worth £25 in total, which is what I paid for this very rare first edition, which I believe only had 1,000 copies in total ever printed for it. But without a dust wrapper. Now, as you can see, this is not the greatest of copies. There was that little sort of notch on the side, which I've just sort of scalpelled off. And also on the spine here, which is very, very faded. So the original green boards have just faded over time. So I think the yellow dust wrapper is long, long gone. But it looks almost like it's like a waxy sort of substance that has been popped onto the side, or something splashed onto it. It might be coffee. To me, it sort of looks like wax, but it's not like it's like dried wax, which is just coming off, because it didn't sort of slide off the scalpel that easily. So, well, as you'll see, it does slowly but surely start to come up, but it's by no means perfect. But I mean, the faded spine, there's nothing I can really do about it. It is what it is. It's been on the shelf for decades, 1953, so it is now 67 years old as we film this. And as I said, this book, even without a dust wrapper, generally sells for £250. So to find a really nice non-X library, this was just a normal copy, for that sort of money was absolutely fantastic. And I felt really, really pleased to get that. So I've scalpelled off what I could, and I'm now using my soft rubber to see if that brings up any other sort of takes up any more of that mess there. As you can see, it was not the greatest of spines, but I have purchased from America. There's a company which does facsimile dust wrappers, and I have purchased from them 3 facsimile dust wrappers for the 3 books that we're doing today. So fingers crossed, you're going to be you'll see those in a while, and you'll see just how well the books come up. But those little marks there, well, I couldn't do much with that spot at the bottom, so I've done about the best I can on that. As you can see, it's a messy old process, this. The other thing about this copy of the book was that it was leaning, so it had obviously been read multiple times, probably at least 10 times, and it was internally very, very foxed, so I couldn't really do much about the internal foxing. I did and ah about possibly rubbing down the page edges. On this one here, I've just got a little a bit of kitchen roll, which I've dabbed in a bit of water to just pop on those worst bits of that sort of where it was white, in the hope that this will just it will just sort of melt it out a bit. And in actual fact, this is actually quite successful. So I'm just rubbing it in now, being very gentle. Obviously, I don't want water and paper don't exactly get on, but if you're careful, it can actually make a bit of a difference. There we are. But yeah, so this book had been read multiple times, so it was not great. Now look, there's a close-up of the top. You can see the spine roll, and also where in the corners that's literally decades of dust that has accumulated over the years there. But as I'm sure you've seen on my videos before, I've got that soft toothbrush, a used toothbrush, and this is what I use to get into those little nooks and crannies. And then I rub across the top edge, which is usually the worst bit. Obviously, what we're looking at now, this is where the dust would have settled in people's bookcases over the years, and it just wipes it right out, which is lovely. So I think you can see just in that little process there, that dirt in the corners near the top edge of the spine has disappeared, and a lot of it, the top edge, some of it's sometimes invisible, but it's there, it's definitely there. So I like to rub my toothbrush along that just to get those that dirt out and blow it out then with my mouth. And then a similar story on the bottom, nowhere near as bad, but you can sort of see the closer to the spine you go, the worse the sort of the foxing and dust and dirt becomes. And I would strongly suggest, if you've got a bit of a collection of hardbacks, that once in a while you just run a hoover along the top edge, just because, once every few months, because just keeping on top of it like that can really reduce the amount of dust that does accumulate. And then, as you can see, each time I'm doing this, I'm bending the book back a little bit more so it's solid, because as I said, it's been read so many times, it's actually started bending a bit, and it's not sort of folded the way I would like. So that's got all sort of the extremities, dust and dirt off. And now, as you can see, on the inside boards, there's a little bit inside. I run the toothbrush down the rails there, just because sometimes, once again, it's a place where things can accumulate, dust and dirt can accumulate, and also around the edges of the cloth there. But after that, that sort of dust, foxing rather, inside on the front and the back boards, there's not a lot I can do about that, sadly. But as I said, this is not a library copy. It's never been in a lending library, so that in itself is quite rare for these hardback copies, because there was 1,000 printed approximately. Almost certainly about half of those would have gone to public lending libraries, and about half of those again would have then gone on to sale to the general public. So that's why this book is so scarce, and it became an instant hit. I think in the first 2 or 3 years it was reprinted almost 20 times. That was in hardback alone. So it makes the very first edition tough to find. Now I think you can already see that it's already looking cleaner, and the actual squareness of it is starting to come around. It is such a shame that little dot on the bottom there, I don't know what it was. I wasn't able to do any better on it, but I'm not overly worried because I think it's okay. Just checking all the edges here, got it as clean as I possibly can. Yeah, it's a bit of a shame, that thing on the side there, but not looking bad, not looking too bad. It's just, as you can see now, I've gone to the back and I'm starting to sort of crease it back the other way. And what this does, it's just sort of it's like reverse reading the books if you're reading it from the back to front. And this is sort of putting some creases back into it so that it doesn't spring. And then over time, I will get it wedged in with some other books around it so that it remains in a really square state, and it will eventually go back to a bit more in line with what it was when the book was brand new. but that's something which does take a little bit of time, but it's totally possible. I've done it multiple times on different books, and it's just one of those things. You need to have a bit of patience with this. And once again, I'd spotted a bit of sort of heavier foxing right down at the bottom of the rail there. Not 100% sure what caused it, but sort of wiped it off as best I could there with the edge of the scalpel. And I tell you what, just having an old toothbrush around has proved invaluable. Not only do I do my books and my paperbacks as well, the edges, but also action figures are fantastic. You can clean action figures by just soaking them in some hot water and then popping the toothbrush around. It goes into all the little nooks and crannies on a sculpted plastic figure. So here you are, see me again. I'm going back and trying to get rid of that spine roll. A lot easier to do on a hardback than it is on a paperback, of course. But even on a paperback, this same technique is possible, where you just work your way back to front and recrease it. But on a paperback, you sort of need to almost do it virtually on every single page for it to make a difference. But it's one of those things, once again, where sort of patience is a virtue, and it'll pay you to go through it bit by bit. So I do know I have a small community of viewers to my channel who actually love these book cleaning videos, but they like it for the sounds of the books being cleaned and the rubbing of the boards without me waffling on about what I'm actually doing at the same time. So I filmed this video with no sound, and what you're hearing now, I should say no narration with what I was doing going along. So what you're hearing now is me reviewing the video back, and I'm doing my commentary over the top of it. But I have released this video on the same day as a bit of an experiment, just with no commentary at all from me, just the raw sounds of the book being repaired as best I can. And as you can see there, it's still quite supple, the pages. Alright, they've got a little bit of page edge foxing and browning. Absolutely normal with a book which is over 60 years old. That's fine with me. But I've done the absolute best I possibly can on this. Just popping out a few bits where there's foxing with a rubber. Now, I have seen people use very light sandpaper to get this page edge foxing off. I didn't feel I wanted to go that far with this particular one. It's not something I've ever really experimented with, and I didn't really want to try it with this, just in case the end result was some really sort of rough edges. And I actually do have a couple of books which I might experiment on, where they've got just one or two blobs of foxing, or there's like an odd mark which has ended up on there, and I might try those and film the results and see how we get on, because that might be quite good for reference going forward. So there's book number 1 done. So the next one we've got is something even older, and it's If I Were You. This is by another one of my favourite authors, P.G. Wodehouse. And this one was published by Herbert Jenkins, who was his later hardback publisher back in 1931. So once again, by this time, P.G. Wodehouse was a massive author, probably one of Britain's best-selling authors, and he was really in his prime at this point. So these Herbert Jenkins first editions certainly had huge print runs and were reprinted multiple times. However, finding for any sort of hardback pre-Second World War in a dust wrapper is actually quite difficult to find. There's a little period date there, I think it's in October 31. So I've only got 2 P.G. Wodehouse hardback first editions in my library. I've got virtually everything in paperback first edition, almost everything. There was a few that came out in the early 30s in the Albatross library, which I'm missing, a couple of other odd ones, but on the whole, in paperback, P.G. Wodehouse was published by Pan, who did a few, and Penguin, who did many of his books, and I've pretty much got them all, and I will do a few dedicated videos, or at least one dedicated video on P.G. Wodehouse in paperback quite soon. But this, compared to Lucky Jim, doesn't need anything like the amount of cleaning. Now, I've had this and the other Wodehouse first edition, which we'll see in a minute, for, well, maybe a decade or two. And because Wodehouse is so very popular, all his original dust jackets have been scanned and are available from the Facsimile Company over in San Francisco, which is where I got my Wodehouse facsimiles. And I was in two minds whether to go for these, because you sometimes see first edition Wodehouses in facsimile on eBay, and they look awful, and I don't know why. It may be because the facsimile jackets that have been used aren't anywhere near as good as the professional ones that I've got from the San Francisco-based company, which I've used before, and I have done a video on that in the past. And so I shall sort of link to that now. But the ones that, well, you'll see it in a minute when we put the 3 books into dust wrappers. I think you'll be really impressed with just how good these look. And now that I filmed this video about 2-3 weeks ago. This is the first chance I've had to get it edited down and to do the audio for it. So I've had the books back on my first edition bookcase now, and boy oh boy do they look good. They really do look fantastic. It's made me think, oh, I wouldn't mind picking up a few more P.G. Wodehouses in first edition if the price was right, and later on down the line doing a similar thing where I give them a bit of a clean. Well, this was good. I fished out a little bit of dirt or something that was in the just in on the spine there. Getting a few more, maybe say 3 or 4 more P.G. Wodehouses, and getting the first edition facsimile wrappers for them. I'd absolutely love to get some of the Jeeves and Wooster books because they are my absolute favourites. They're just fantastic. Now, this last book that we're going to clean is Uxbridge by Wodehouse, and this one's even earlier. This one's a staggering 96 years old. It's in 1924 this one came out, and it's very much of the, I think I only paid about £10-12 for it. It's very much of the typical sort of Wodehouse period, when life was an awful lot simpler. Nice little original dedication in there, and a bookseller stamp as well, also dated 1924. I absolutely love those sorts of things. And if you look at the foxing on the spine on this, on the page edges, you'll see, there we are, look, it is quite severe. Inside, not too bad, but the page edges, it really is foxed. And, potentially, I could, possibly experiment and get some very, very fine sandpaper and start running it along the edges there, just to see, because it would lighten it up. It's as simple as that. So maybe that this particular book might be a candidate for one that in the future I'll try that little experiment with the sandpaper on. But in the meantime, I just need to clean the edges in the normal way. So that's what I'm doing now. So my trusty toothbrush is, and look at that, you can sort of see the level of dust and dirt is coming off really quickly there. You can almost see, if you look at the left hand side and then you look at the right, you can almost see the difference in the level of dirt that's come off. And depending on if you're watching this on a mobile or if you're watching on a bit of a bigger screen, you might actually notice that little sort of plumes of dust start coming off. And I know I bought that big paperback collection a few months ago now, and there was one box of old Collins Crime Club titles, and I don't think they'd ever been done, and they were incredibly dusty. So much so, in fact, I had to go into the garden to wipe the tops off because they were phenomenally dusty. And I just didn't want to be breathing in that level of dust. It was just awful. But yeah, slowly but surely, since I've been filming my sort of book videos, I have been working my way through the collection. And although there's still an awful lot to go, you know, maybe, I don't know, halfway through the Pans, and probably about maybe just under halfway through the Penguin books. A lot of the other sort of the smaller series, just to keep things interesting, have now been. I've done videos on them, and I've pretty much cleaned them as I've gone along. But then again, in the world of books, there's always something else to have a look at. And I do have, as soon as lockdown's over, I've got a couple of mates who are absolutely dying to lend stuff for me to film. And I don't know about clean, but certainly I've got some fantastic stuff on the horizon from collectors I've known for decades who have got stuff which is eye-wateringly good. So just to tease you, you won't believe what's around the corner. As soon as sort of lockdown gets lifted and we can start seeing each other again. So that's the 3 original hardbacks that I've had for quite some time, although Lucky Jim was a much more recent purchase, probably about a year or so ago. But now, what we need to do is pop these into, now they've all been cleaned, is to pop them into some beautiful facsimile dust wrappers, because I want them looking on the shelf as good as they looked when they were brand new. At least as good as I can get. So here you see the original sort of mustardy yellow Lucky Jim jacket. Now, obviously this is a facsimile, and each of these jackets is clearly marked as a facsimile. You see it there just in the bottom right corner, near the price, the 12 and 6, you see Facsimile Dust Jackets, LLC. So that's that company in San Francisco. Now these have been scanned from the originals and then restored on computer. And the first 4 or 5 Kingsley Amis books are all in the standard Galance yellow jackets. Obviously I've put mine in and it looks fantastic, but when I've put it next to the other, the 2nd, 3rd, 4th and 5th original Amis novels in my collection, this one looks fantastic in comparison to the original really dusty and dirty wrappers. Now, when you buy these from the company in America, they do already come in these really nice plastic sleeves which make the dust jackets pop. So they're really great, but what I do, I just pull the jacket to one end, and the little bit of excess dust wrapper sleeve that's included, I just trim that off, because this particular dust jacket presented a few problems when putting it on, because there's no clear lines where the sort of the end flaps were to be folded in. So I had to sort of it was a process of like start wrapping it around the book and then make some sort of lighter creases until I felt I got it absolutely right, and then I'd sort of put slightly more permanent creases on. So that's what I'm doing now. Yeah, so it's really quite, the first bit is really quite tricky. The Wodehouses were much easier because there was like a clearly defined line where the flaps were supposed to be, but not so much so on Lucky Jim. It did take a little bit of, jiggery pokery, put it on, is it right, take it off again, put it on. So I did cut a little bit of that out because it was going on a little bit, but you get the idea. As you can see, wow, what a great little wrapper. It's a shame it's not illustrated, but that's exactly how all these sort of early Galance ones differentiated themselves on the market back in the 50s, even into the 60s. They were using the same sort of principle. A lot of very early key sci-fi, which Galance published quite a bit of. Victor Galance also came out with these yellow jackets, but they are what they are. It sure does improve it, doesn't it? Look at that, look how great it looks. And I have to say, when I popped it, when it was done, and then it had been weighted down for a few days to take all the air out, which I do when I pop facsimile jackets on. When I then put it next to the rest of the Kingsley Amis collection, it just popped off the shelf. It was really, really great. There we were. So now that I had that pretty much set, I was able to pop much more permanent folds in, just to make sure it was definitely in place, which it is. Yes, as I said, Lucky Jim and probably The Green Man are my two favourites, followed by Colonel Sun, his James Bond adventure. His son, Martin Amis, who's still around today. Martin Amis has done a couple of... He's a real good writer as well. I particularly recommend one from him, an early one called Dead Babies, which is another quite scarce first edition, but obviously these are really easy to find in paperback. So there we are, that one's just about done. It just needs some waiting on it now over a period of a few days, which is what I did. Once these were all in dust wrappers, I kept them weighted down with a load more hardbacks on top for about 3 or 4 days, and then I put them on the shelf and they just slipped in beautifully. So here is the nice colourful jacket from 1931 for If I Were You. I'm not 100% sure who the illustrator was on this, so I won't actually quote it here now, but I think it was the same chap who worked for her on a lot of Herbert Jenkins titles. And they really do scream, well, this really screams of the 1930s, doesn't it? So once again, just cutting down the excess plastic wrap. So, finding a PG Wodehouse in a first edition without a dust wrapper, such as this one, it'll probably cost, if you're really lucky, you might get it for £15 to £20 for a Wodehouse of this period without a dust wrapper, which I think is an absolute steal. Now, the actual replacement dust wrapper is probably going to cost you another tenner or so. So you might be outlaying £25, £30 for something that looks fantastic on the shelf and is a first edition book, just with the reprint, a facsimile wrapper. This book here, if you have this one in first edition with an original dust wrapper, you're probably talking £600, £700, £800. Lucky Jim is regularly seen for £3,000, £4,000 in its original wrapper, which is obscene. But it's because that original wrapper is just so rare. So this is a way, and as you know, I love a good bargain. This is a way, if you want some nice hardbacks in your collection, this is one way to do it. Another thing I've been pulling together, and these will be coming up in a video fairly soon. I've just got a couple more to track down, and that is the Ian Fleming James Bond books, but in book club hardback. Now, even the book clubs which were published, period, from 57, I think the earliest ones are, up until the mid to late 60s, they, including Colonel Sun in actual fact, those present fantastic value for money at the moment, I think, compared to the original Jonathan Cape hardbacks, and you will see some of those quite soon. There we are. So that was a much easier process, and boy oh boy, doesn't that stand out, something lovely there. Oh, that's great. I absolutely love that. Really, really nice. I've yet to read a Wodehouse that I don't enjoy. Even golf, which I don't really play. He's done loads of multiple golf stories. His short stories, he was just a master of the short story, which I always love as well. But it's the Jeeves and Wooster ones that are my absolute favourites. Every single one is effortlessly fun. I love them. So there we are. That's the second one done. God, it looks great, doesn't it? And then we just got Uckridge. So this was even earlier, 1924. And this, you know, it's a bit more of a plainer dust wrapper, this one. You know, the grey is a bit more sombre, but no less desirable. And one of these would be just sort of legendary in a dust wrapper copy here. You'd be talking 4 figures probably for one of these. I had a friend of mine who is a big P.G. Wodehouse collector. He was a book dealer for about 20 years when he left the Navy. And I remember going around to his house once to pick up some books. And he had an entire bay, sort of like a floor to ceiling, and all that was in it was his P.G. Wodehouse books in hardback. Absolutely fantastic collection. I mean, mind blowing what he had there. And he knew Wodehouse was eminently collectible, and he thought, yeah, I'll just keep these. And what a good choice. I wonder if he's still got them all. So, as I said, somewhat easier because it's obvious where the dust flaps were folded. So I just use my ruler and I fold over the ruler there. So that creates a few millimeters, which represent, my ruler is representing the thickness of the cover. That's why I use that old wooden ruler in there. So it's not folding it dead flat, it's folding it with a bit of an edge, a bit of a gap. And we'll see how this old copy of Uckridge gets brought to life when it's got its facsimile dust wrapper wrapped around it. Look at that. There we are. So I've just popped the slightly lighter creases on there just to make sure it's perfectly in line. Then I can just crease down and make them a little bit more permanent. That's great, isn't it? I think it would be a very easy way to collect Agatha Christie's. You could like pick up the copies without dust wrappers and then buy the facsimiles. And there they all are. And of course they're all shiny and they slide around each other. Lovely, aren't they? Really, really pleased with those.